Hey guys, welcome back. This is lesson 14 in the theme 5 weather, climate and ecosystems GCSE geography sequence. We have been looking at the causes of deforestation in last lesson, why we're removing the rainforest, how quickly it's being cut down, and in which particular regions of the Amazon it's being cut down the most rapidly. So what we're going to move on to today is, well, if we're removing rainforests on such a large scale and at such a high speed, what could the effects of that be at different scales? Locally, exactly where the rainforest is being removed, what will happen in that place? Nationally, how would it affect the countries that the Amazon rainforest covers? And globally, how could the removal of rainforest in one continent have an effect across the entire planet? And to do that, we're going to activate our prior knowledge about the water, nutrient, and carbon cycles, and we're then going to apply that knowledge to identify and explain how deforestation is having an effect at these different scales. So if you want to pause the video here a moment and go ahead and write that title in your books quickly then, please. Okay, so I've got a YouTube clip to start us off that sort of just reviews what we were talking about last lesson. You can either copy and paste this from the PowerPoint that's in the Moodle folder if you'd like to rewatch it, but I'm also going to just show you it quickly now as well. If this wants to go full screen, there we go. Okay.
Well, another one of the really big stories of environmental change is the deforestation in the Amazon. An interesting part of the story starts at the river, a long ways to the north, actually. And if we zoom in here along the Amazon, way up in the what looks like virgin forest still, and is a lot of it is, you can see a road that leads from the Amazon here and along through more or less untouched rainforest for hundreds and hundreds of miles. And as you get south far enough, you start to see clearing along the road where farmers are starting to clear the
So what starts to happen with deforestation is any access
forest
routes,
and farm.
any access routes into the forest, that's where you can get machinery in and you can get logs out. So he mentioned there the Amazon River, the roads that branch off of it, they are being used as access routes into the forest. So this is where your deforestation starts, and it kind of starts in almost like a fishbone pattern. These patches coming out in a linear fashion either side of the road, but eventually these patches spread further and further and begin to join up, and that creates huge areas of deforestation. And what he's going to show you now is a time lapse across, I think it's only about a decade or so, and the areas that appear in a lighter shade of sort of a browny color, those are the areas of rainforest that have been removed. You can see just how rapid and widespread the deforestation is.
You know, the road it facilitates the farming, the road facilitates the population coming out there, and then all along that road the land is cleared, and when there isn't any land next to the road, another road is cut off in another direction, and people start clearing that. And progressively you get this fishbone pattern that expands and expands and grows together into things that look more like this. And the forest is just a handful of little scraps anymore that are scattered throughout between farm fields where it's either a low spot that's wet or for some other reason isn't ideal to farm.
So if you imagine, what you end up with is this whole area would have been rainforest, of course, and you've got these access roads here where farming and logging is happening either side, and you end up with sort of patches in between that are completely cut off as the areas around them have been cleared. And you've got animals trapped in here, various different species, and they can't get to the other patches. They can't breed between them. They can't share food sources, water sources. They can't share territory. They can't spread out across the space that they would usually be used to and the space that they need. So not only is the loss of the rainforest bad, but the patches that are left become really overpopulated, and there's not enough food, not enough water, not enough territory, and not enough mates.
Amazon basin deforestation is along an arc in the states of Rondonia, Mato Grosso, and Para.
So those are the three
And
states
from
we talked about
1999 to
last lesson.
2012, it's quite striking. This whole area here in eastern Para State, if you go back to 1999, the vast majority of it is intact forest. And you can just see the herringbone roads come out through the forest, and then roads come out from those, and the land clearing and the forest disappearing. And it's made all the more obvious with these two protected areas here, which don't disappear. Makes it really quite compelling to see. As you look at this, these are, a lot of people call the Amazon the lungs of the world. It's a little bit at a time when you're on the ground and you clear an area for soybeans and you can feed some.
Okay, so you can see where some strategies are starting to come in, like national parks and protected areas, like here and here. And that just shows you the stark difference between what the rainforest coverage used to be like and what it's like now. Well, not even now. This is 10 years ago, 10 years ago. So just imagine how little rainforest is left in these regions now. So that was sort of just to give you a visual representation of the rates of deforestation that we were talking about last lesson. So if I just exit that full screen and bring us back to where we were. So last lesson we discussed the reasons behind that rate of deforestation. So in the back of your books, from memory if you can, there were 8 of them. See if you can list the reasons that we put in that spider diagram why the rainforest is being removed. For example, cattle ranching. Pause the video here a moment and see how many you can remember. Okay, let's see how well you did. So we had the timber, cattle ranching, growing soya, mineral mining, urbanization, agriculture, oil drilling, palm oil production. There are lots and lots and lots of others. Okay, these are just 8 that if you Google causes of deforestation, these are some of the top ones that come up. Leading ones from this list, cattle ranching and agriculture and urbanization. Okay, so what we're going to look at is, well, we're removing the rainforest at alarming rates. Why are we so bothered though? We hear it a lot in the news now. We're becoming more and more aware that the impact of rainforest loss is going to be so massive and we should all be really worried. But why? What would the effects of deforestation be? So we're going to look at a local scale first off. So the loss of the rainforest right where it's happening. What would the effect be? So put a subheading, effects of deforestation at a local scale, the nutrient cycle and habitat loss. Okay, so if we revisit something that we've talked about before, which is the nutrient cycle in the tropical rainforest, here's your biomass store. Where's my arrow? There it is. Your biomass store in the rainforest is really, really large. Okay, these are some of the most biodiverse regions on the planet. You've got a lot of living things. And essentially that's what we are, is we are full of nutrients. Okay, lots of vegetation, lots of animals. And the biomass store remains really large because very few leaves fall because there's no winter. Remember, it's a year-round growing season. What leaves and branches do fall and what animals do die is what makes up the litter store. Now, the litter store is not very big because there's not much coming in, but there's a lot going out. And the reason there's a lot going out is the really warm tropical climate means that saprophytes, your fungus and mushrooms, and your detritivores, your worms and cockroaches, things like that, they work really, really quickly and break down the dead stuff to rot it into the soil. Nutrients get put back in the soil very, very rapidly. But the soil store doesn't get very big for 2 reasons. Number one, it all gets sucked up by the trees because the biomass is so great. And number 2, the rainfall is so heavy that a lot of nutrients get washed out of the soil as well. That's called leaching. So before deforestation, this is your nicely balanced, happy as Larry rainforest nutrient cycle. Thank you very much. Now, If we come along and we clear a massive area for a cattle ranch, for example, there is now no biomass, which means there are no leaves to fall to the ground. And if there's no trees, there's going to be no fallen branches, and there's going to be no animals in the region. So there's going to be no dead animals, no dead plants, no fallen leaves, which means there's no litter store. And if you have no litter, there's nothing for anything to rot down into the soil. So there's no nutrients going into the soil. And as soon as there's no nutrients in the soil, nothing can regrow. Even if you tried to go back into that area and do an afforestation project, plant loads of trees back in, if you've left it too long, there's no nutrients left in the soil anyway. Because number one, there's no litter to rot in. And number two, without the canopy of the rainforest protecting the soil from the heavy rain, any nutrients that were left will get washed straight out as soon as it rains. So instead of this cycle, you've now got a very different feedback loop. So there's very few or no trees to protect the soil, which means there's very few leaves or other organic, natural material being dropped. There's no animals in the region either, which means that there's no litter store to rot down to add the nutrients back to the soil. And that means, number one, the soil becomes infertile. Number two, without the trees to protect it, soil erosion rates are massive. It gets washed away, blown away, any nutrients get washed out by the heavy rain. And that means that if there's hardly any soil left behind at all, and what little is left behind is infertile, then there's going to be hardly any regrowth. So there's no vegetation, and so on. It's a negative feedback loop. What I'd like you to do, you can either copy this out as it is, or if you want to sort of put it linear, like very few trees, no protection for soil, dash, very few leaves or other organic material dropped, dash, no litter, and so on. If you'd rather process it and put it into a paragraph, however you want to represent it, as a feedback loop, in a line separated by dashes, in a paragraph, whatever suits you, get something down that explains in the area, if you cut down those trees and it breaks the nutrient cycle, what is the effect? Okay, pause the video here a moment and go ahead and do that. Okay, on top of this, obviously, the local effect is you've removed that entire habitat. So animal species now have no habitat, which means species will decline, species could become extinct. You've also removed the home for indigenous tribes. So the tribe will be forced to move to a different area of the rainforest. There might already be a tribe there. That's going to cause territorial civil wars. Tribes get wiped out through war over territory. Okay, next step, effects at a national scale. So stepping out a little bit, if we remove the rainforest, how could it affect the countries in the area? And in this case, it's to do with the water cycle. The hydrological cycle would be the better term. So pause the video here a moment and put this down as a subheading. Okay, so here is a before and after representation of the water cycle, of the hydrological cycle, before and after deforestation. Here's a water cycle, minding its own business. Okay, now the rainforest, in a way, actually produces its own rainfall. All right, so as I hope you can remember, if you activate your prior knowledge, when trees photosynthesize, yes, they take in carbon dioxide and they release oxygen, but they also release moisture. Water evaporates from the plants. That's called transpiration. That transpiration puts moisture into the air, and that moisture rises and condenses to create the clouds that then bring rainfall. In this case, it's called convectional rainfall because the rising is driven by heat, by convection. So the trees, in a way, they put the moisture in the air to form the clouds to bring the rain. They produce their own rainfall. The rain then obviously gets intercepted, caught and slowed down and drips off the stems and the leaves and etc. And it soaks into the ground and then it gets taken up again by the trees During photosynthesis, it then gets released, and so forth. Okay. Now, if you remove the trees, there's now no transpiration. Okay, here's your after. Once there's no transpiration, there's no moisture going into the air, which means fewer clouds will form, which means there's no rainfall to go into the soil. That should be a cross there as well, apologies. And if there's no rainfall going into the soil, there's nothing for the remaining rainforest to drink. So if you might only be cutting it down in some areas, but you could actually dry out the climate of a much wider area, and any remaining rainforest will die because there won't be enough rainfall. Long term, the break in the water cycle will dry out the climate, and you cannot reverse that. Okay, now then, you've got these two diagrams in the handout for this lesson, so if you're able to print them out and cut and stick them into your book as a visual representation to help you explain what you're about to explain in your answers to these two questions. Okay, so number one, when the trees are removed, there's no transpiration. What issues does this cause for climate? That's what I've just run through. So if you need to go back and re-listen, a sentence here that starts with no trees means no transpiration, which means therefore, as a result, consequently, furthermore, and eventually, the climate of the whole area will become much drier. Okay. Now, number two, without trees, or in this case, apparently, without trees, classic. Those of you that are in my lessons quite often, you'll know that typos are kind of my trademark. Apologies for that. I've gotten to the point now with these videos where once I'm this far in, I ain't starting again. I'm just going to roll with it. Okay, so don't write down trees, write down trees. Without trees, there are no leaves to intercept, to catch and slow down the rainfall from reaching the soil and rivers. What problems will this cause for rivers? What problems will it cause for the soil? Again, we've touched on both of these a little bit. If there's no interception, the rainfall will reach the soil straight away, and the soil will become saturated. That means it's so full of water it cannot absorb any more. Once the soil becomes saturated, it behaves like an impermeable surface. No more rain can soak in. So if there's no infiltration, surface runoff will increase really rapidly, and the rainfall will run straight off the soil, straight into the rivers, and cause a flood. So 2A, the problems it would cause for the rivers, no interception means the soil becomes saturated more quickly, which means there's no infiltration, causing too much surface runoff, causing the rivers to overflow more quickly. So it increases the flood risk. With regards to the soil, if there's no trees, there's no canopy to protect the soil from the heavy rainfall. There's no interception. And what will happen is called splash erosion, actually. The raindrops, when they splash onto the soil, they actually dislodge some of the particles from the soil surface. And when surface runoff kicks in, it washes those particles away. So without interception, the soil gets broken up by the heavy rain, and surface runoff will wash it away. So you get increased rates of soil erosion, and then nothing can regrow once the soil's been washed away. So pause the video here a moment, re-listen to the things I've just said, cut and stick the images, answer the questions. As usual, it's up to you whether you'd like to write the question out and write a slightly shortened answer, or whether you want to go in with a full sentence. All right, but pause the video here a moment and go ahead and do that, please. Okay, so finally, let's take a look at globally. How on earth could trees being cut down in one country affect the entire planet? Pause the video here a moment and go ahead and write down this subheading. Okay, so it's all to do with the carbon cycle. Now, we talked about the carbon cycle earlier on in theme 5, and this is what you drew in your books. So as we know, plants, when they photosynthesize, They take in carbon dioxide and they release oxygen and they release transpiration. The crucial part is the taking in of carbon dioxide. All plants do it. From the cactus on your windowsill to the oak tree in the forest to every single plant in the tropical rainforests. All plants absorb carbon dioxide, which obviously does us a massive favour. The levels of CO2 that we are now releasing into our atmosphere, it's because our lifestyles have changed. We've gone through the Industrial Revolution where we cottoned on to the fact that if you dig up fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, and you burn them to power machinery, whether it's in a factory, whether it's transport, whatever it is, it benefits us in many ways. Obviously, you can make stuff and you can get places, but when you burn, the stored carbon in the fossil fuels gets released into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. And plants reabsorb that for us, lock it away in their matter, in their leaves, in their branches, trunks, bark. They lock it away. So when the tree dies or the leaves fall, it rots back down into the soil, gets stored in the soil, locked away nicely for us. It's not floating around in the air, adding to climate change. So it does sort of link in a little bit with the nutrient cycle, this part here. So if we cut down the trees, there's now no vegetation to do this crucial bit, to draw in, to absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So if there's no trees absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere, it's all just left floating around in the atmosphere. And that continues to thicken the upper layer of our atmosphere, adding to the greenhouse effect. And the enhanced greenhouse effect is what we know as global warming, or now we refer to it more as climate change. So no trees means no carbon dioxide being absorbed. You've lost the carbon sink. Therefore, all the carbon that would have been absorbed is left in the atmosphere, which continues to thicken the upper layers of the atmosphere, accelerating climate change and causing our planet to warm up, which is, as well as population growth, which we mentioned previously, climate change is one of the other major pressures, major challenges facing our Earth currently. So this little diagram, again, it's on your handout for this lesson. If you'd like to cut and stick it in as just a visual aid to help support you in explaining what I'd like you to explain, which is, previous, how cutting down trees has a global effect. No trees, no carbon sink. The carbon that would have been absorbed is left floating around in the atmosphere, which continues to thicken our atmosphere and therefore causes even more climate change, which is a global issue. Okay, so pause the video here and go ahead and do that, please. Just a sentence or two, little mini paragraph. Plus, usually when the trees are cut down in the rainforest, say it's for farming or it's for building a city, you've got trees laying everywhere. What's the quickest way to get rid of them? And cheapest way to get rid of them? Burn them. Now, I said that trees, when they absorb the carbon dioxide, they lock it away for us in themselves. So if you cut them down and burn them, it's called slash and burn, you're releasing that carbon dioxide straight into the atmosphere. So deforestation, the effect of it at a global scale is kind of twofold. You've lost the carbon sink, as we've just explained. In addition, usually when the trees are cut down, they are burned to clear them. This releases tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, adding to the already increased levels. So not only do you not have trees absorbing it, but when you cut them down and burn them, you're releasing extra CO2 as well. Add a little bit onto the end of your paragraph to explain how slash and burn also adds to climate change, because it causes rapid release of the carbon that was stored in the trees that were cut down. Okay, that brings to a close lesson 14. Well done. We're approaching the end of the rainforest element of the ecosystems part, so there's just one more step to go, which is far more positive than the last two lessons that we've looked at. It's all to do with sustainable solutions. So the rainforest is super important. We realize the effects that we're facing of cutting it down at the rate that we're cutting it down. So there are things beginning to be done. Deforestation rates in a lot of regions are actually beginning to drop as global awareness is increasing of the effects that it's having locally, nationally, and globally, like we've just discussed. So next lesson, we are going to look at sustainable solutions. How can we manage the rainforest so that the countries that it covers can still make money and it still provides jobs, but in a way that doesn't damage the environment so drastically. So I will see you for lesson 15 whenever you're ready.